Hi, friends. I am going to read chapter 11. I got a lot of your feedback from today's exit ticket, and the majority of you said that you prefer to have one chapter at a time assigned than two. And I'm hoping and thinking that it's probably because you can prepare higher quality jots if you're really just having the time to look more closely at one chapter rather than two a night. So I'm going to read chapter 11. Obviously, Luca is here, keeping me warm and going to help me with those tough words. And Boone is here for the story as well. Sharing my screen. All right, chapter 11, Saturday, October 18th through Saturday, November 15th, 1777. This is a quote from 1777 diary of Sergeant John Smith, 1st Rhode Island Regiment. We marched before day from these woods and traveled all day in the storm, in the worst traveling I ever saw. The roads was mostly clay, which was like mortar. We traveled to a small town. The next day, we quick marched 40 miles south to Albany. Rather, my company marched and arrived dog-tired from the pace. On account of my worldly experience driving ox carts from Fort Trumbull, I drove the company's supply wagon. Earned myself a few splinters in my backside, but kept my boots dry and my spirits high. The officers ordered us to build barricades and more barricades at our new camp. We had captured Burgoyne's men, but the main body of the British Army, some 30,000 soldiers, lay 150 miles away in the city of New York, a hornet's nest ready to explode. After the first week's work, the skies opened and we near drowned in cold and ceaseless rain. A burly lad named Greenlaw claimed he saw Noah sailing up the Hudson in his ark filled with animals. We had a heated argument in our tent about which would be a more lethal foe, 20 redcoats or 2 elephants from an ark. Rain, snow, hail, sleet, no matter what fell from the sky, we shoveled mud and hefted timbers and rocks. At day's end, we looked like muddy ghouls rising up from the grave. We made sport, of course. The mud formed itself nicely into balls that needed to be flung at the targets we set up. Bits of planking shaped with an axe to resemble the tall hats worn by the lobsterbacks. Evan was determined to best me. He would need more practice than Albany could give him. Other fellows joined our competition a few times, which then turned into a great muddy battle. We armed ourselves with clots of dirt and hollered and hooted, reliving the Battle of Saratoga. Only no one ever wanted to play the role of the British, so all was chaos. The washerwomen ended our warfare. They marched to the captain and said they would quit, if forced, to clean the clothes of boys and men who had ruined their breeches and shirts in play. Washerwomen were sour-headed and cheerless. I finally sold my stolen bits of silver and pewter, along with the dead redcoats' papers and pencils, to a toothless man in a dark tavern. He cheated me on the price, but I had no choice, for our regiment had still not been paid. I bought a new red felt hat, a heavy blue jacket, and a dull knife. The few shillings that remained I spent on a bottle of ginger syrup and vinegar of squills that an herb lady swore would preserve me from any putrid fevers. I shared the remedy with the fellows in our tent. Eben, thick-necked Luke Greenlaw, who was an apprentice joiner with scarred hands, Hugh Faulkner, a stoop-shouldered son of a fisherman who liked to draw, the gloomy tailor Sylvanus, and Peter Brown, a farm boy said to be the fastest runner in the brigade. They had started out formal and cautious with me, excepting Ebenezer, for they had never lived side by side with anyone whose skin was not white. One night, the cook served us beans and more beans for dinner. Instead of sleeping, we farted all night long, which caused us to choke, sputter, complain loudly, and laugh so hard our sides were still sore 2 days later. After that, we were more like friends. Uncle Sergeant commanded 20 of privates, 4 tents worth of us. The tent closest to us was home to a yellow-haired fellow whose enlistment ended before I even ever learned his name. The Janak twins, who looked so much alike, it befuddled me when they stood next to each other. and two boisterous fellows, Aaron and Henry Barry, who were distant kin to Eben, but not, he said, from the good side of the family. The last lad was John Burns. His rude manner declared him my enemy the first time he clapped eyes on me. Burns had white skin that turned red when he was angry, a frequent condition, dirt-colored hair that never stayed tied back in a queue, and small eyes like a badger's that were forever seeking a way to avoid work. He spat at my feet whenever I walked by. He accused me of stealing my new hat. He said the crudest kinds of things about my parents and grandparents, and he convinced the Barry brothers to join him in his foulness. My father told me many times that a lot of white people have twisted hearts. It prevents them from seeing the world properly, he'd say, and turns them into tools of the devil. Father would have advised me to let God sort out the evil inside John Burns. I couldn't wait that long. If I did not stand up to him, he would make my life a misery. Our lieutenant had ordered that privates rotate the work of gathering firewood. Burns ducked his duty the first time it came around. The second time, the fire had near gone out, and the fellow started up a hullabaloo. I told you I can't, Burns moaned. My arm is still poorly. He pointed at Eben. Make the blunderhead fetch it. Eben took his share of teasing on account of his trusting nature and tendency to talk, but he hated being called a blunderhead. Eben took his turn at dawn, I said loudly. Get off your plaguey backside and do your duty. A few fellows chuckled. Burns tossed a pebble into the dying flames and waited for silence. My arm hurts, he finally said. Fetch the wood for me, you dirty nigger. I was on my feet and headed for him before anyone could grab hold of me. Burns stood up and stepped backward until he was flanked by Aaron and Henry. It's not just my arm, Burns sneered. My feet are terrible cold. Give me your boots, too. Leave off, called Greenlaw. I calculated. Greenlaw might take my side in a fight, but then again, he might choose to stay out of it. I could probably beat Burns. He was a bit bigger than me, but I was faster and smarter. I would suffer mightily if all three of them joined in, but I had to make my stand now or forever be their target. You want these boots? I asked. 10 shillings and they're yours. 10 shillings more, I won't piss in them first. Burns stepped forward but did not raise his arm. He was afraid to fight, like most twisted heart bullies. I would take him down hard and fast before his friends hurt me too bad. If I succeeded, he'd trouble me no more. What is this foolishness? The sergeant stepped between us. Blast. Eben had gone running for help again. Had to cure him of that. Smith? The sergeant asked. Explain yourself. He ordered me to tend the fire, sir, I said. I took my turn last night. Then he demanded I give him my boots. The sergeant raised his hand to stop me from continuing. What say you? Asked Burns. What right have you to take his boots or to force him to your duty? He doesn't belong here, Burns said with heat. He has a ring in his ear like a sailor, but he doesn't talk like one. He is so cloaked in his falsehood. I am certain he's a runaway slave, sir. The words were a blow to my gut. When my former master enlisted me in New York, he had promised me freedom for serving in the army. I had served that year and was thus free, but I had no papers to prove it, which could make trouble for me with some folk. He's not, you clod pate, Eben argued. How do you know? Burns asked. Because he said he was free? Of course he did. They're worse than the Irish when it comes to lying. Where are his papers? A few voices in the shadows murmured agreement. My enemy was gaining strength. I had to attack. Private Burns makes a good argument, sir. I forced an agreeable mask on my face. Allow me to borrow it. He claims he was a tinsmith before the war, but he can't be much over 18. I wager he's still indentured to his master. Could have another 2 or 3 years till his time is up. He's the runaway, sir, unless he has papers proving different. Enough. The sergeant pulled off his cap, ran his hand over his pate, and set the cap back in place. None of you are free men because you are in the army, and I do have papers that prove that. Now stop jabbering at each other and fetch the blasted wood. All of you. That night was the start of John Burns's open campaign against me. He became the best bootlicker ever was, waiting close to the sergeant's elbow for the chance to be of service or to whisper poisonous notions about me, or Greenlaw, or the other fellows who were not in his favor. Half the time, the sergeant did not listen, but half the time he did. When we marched south of Albany, the muckworm named Burns was driving the supply wagon. I marched in the last line of our company and had to be quick-footed to avoid the droppings left by the horses. Okay, don't forget to stop throughout the recording and definitely go back and reread those parts and look for those tiny, tiny clues and ask yourself what seems important, reread it. Why is it important? What might the author be really trying to say there? What theories are you coming up with, predictions? And I look forward to our discussion tomorrow or Monday. Thanks for listening.